Hi everyone, it's Cindy from Cindy's Art. Thank you for joining me today for this watercolor lesson. Be sure to hit the like button if you find value in this tutorial, and be sure to subscribe to be notified for upcoming videos.
We're working on a super fun, easy forest that you're going to do primarily with splatters and with sponges. So get out your old sponges. You can use cheap ones, tear them apart, rip them apart, cut them up. And I use a 9x12 Daniel or Arches watercolor paper, taped it onto a hard board, and I'm using Daniel Smith watercolor paints today. Well, the first thing I did was wet this paper down, not once, about twice and 3 times. And if your office dries paper out fast, make sure you put more water on top of it, let it sit for a second. But through the first third of this video, I actually am going to have my paper very, very wet, and I'm going to keep it wet. So I started off adding some cobalt teal with a little bit of ultramarine blue deep, and I put a tiny bit of a gray in there as well. Lunar black would be great. And I am simply going to add that into the background so I can create this ethereal, this super duper light sky. And I didn't want it a super duper bright blue. I wanted to use a muted tone. That's why I added some of the lunar black in there. So I'm going to continue to make sure my paint brush has water and it has the paint in it. And when I'm doing that, it's going to help keep my paper wet enough. So I thought I want to add in some soft greens in this background because in the background there are these trees that you only see a hint of, and they're not really strong. So I decided while my paper was wet to take some of my green apatite and my gold green, those two colors, and I splattered them. And then I added in some blue splatters as well because in the background those trees are very misty looking, and they've got a little bit of a blue tone or a gray tone. They've got a little bit of a green tone. So I'm going to continue to splatter this, and then we'll move on to the next area. So I mentioned I have a very old sponge, and I tore this thing up. You can buy sponges, but they can be very expensive. Buy them on sale if you want some specialty sponges. But I have found in the US we have something called a dollar store, $1, and I will buy a pack of sponges and I will just cut them up, rip them up, and do whatever I want to with them. So I'm focusing on the tree branches and the leaves. And I want to make sure I remember as I paint where some of these key branches are. So I thought, okay, I'm going to grab my mid-tones, not dark, not light, and I am going to put in some of my blue tones branches. And all I'm going to do is suggest them. My paper is still wet, and there's times you'll see me grab a spray bottle and I will just spritz it. And the reason why I'm doing that is when I put this paint on here, I want it to stay soft. I don't want harsh lines right now. So that's one of the ways, or the tips that I would tell you for today, is when you're wanting to keep things soft, grab your spray bottle and just spritz it a little bit, and let your paper continue to be wet. Well, after I added in enough of like the mid-tones so I could remember, okay, here's where I want some of the branches, and that helped me figure out where to put the tree trunks later too. Then what I did is, while this sponging was still wet, this is pretty wet, this is not dry paint, but once I put in some of these mid-tones, I went ahead and grabbed some paint and added some dark in there. And when I am touching a darker paint in there, what it's going to do, because it's wet, it's going to spread out. And that continues to keep it soft. Here's some of my darker colors. I used a blue green, so I took Hooker's green and I took some of the Phthalo blue, which is a really nice tealy type of blue, and I mixed those together and I created those midtones. When I went darker, I used more of the Hooker's green and then just a touch of Ultramarine in there. When I moved to the light tones, I'm using the green gold, Daniel Smith green gold, and I'm using a little bit of the green apatite. The green apatite color is really phenomenal. When I use that color, I like to use it in a large amount of space, and the reason why is I want to put that color on a space where you can just look at the paint. It spreads apart and it has different flecks of different colors when you use it. It's mind-blowing. So Daniel Smith paint is a lot of fun. Right now I'm just sponging, and here I am grabbing that little spray bottle and I spritzed it, and then I took paper towel and I wiped it up. See, I'm dabbing it up. I spritz and dab and spritz and dab. And what I'm doing is softening up any hard lines I have because I want this to be soft. Now I just spritzed and then I splattered. And what that's going to do by spritzing, I've got water drops on there. Then when I splatter water or paint, it spreads out. It just naturally stays soft and kind of blends. And this picture lends into having a soft and blended background, not a ton of lines. That's why I thought, oh, we have got to do some splattering and some sponging, because it creates a texture, and it has different types of textures that gets created when you're painting. You're not doing a lot of work when you're doing it that way. So I do like sponging, and I use 3 different types of sponges. A larger one that had these great big huge holes, then I use a tighter one, and I use another one that I had ripped up and cut up in order for me to get these really interesting branches. Well, so we're moving on towards the bottom part of the painting, and what I want to do is remind myself I need this super duper dark because I'm looking up into the sky. This painting is so different because it's from the perspective like we're in the woods looking up, which I thought was going to be fun for us to try, you know, this kind of angle. And I'm going to do another painting like it, I think here soon. And so I thought, okay, I've got to keep this super dark, so I used my Hooker's green mixed with the Lunar black. And I did the same thing where I'm using this huge brush, and this brush, I'm going to pull it out while I'm talking with you. But this brush that I'm using is a Princeton Neptune size 4, and it's quite large. And I am just loading it up with paint, and I am just laying down these greens, super duper dark. And then you can tell I dipped into my rust ink. On the left-hand side towards the top, I've got a little jar that you can see in my picture, and that jar has got my rust ink in it. And I thought, oh, you know, let me try this. And I'm going to tell you, I'm one where I don't mind if you see that I tried something, I didn't like it, so later on I add more detail. I'm okay with that. I would rather put a video together that includes something like that, where you get to see, well, how do you correct it if you don't like it? Don't throw the picture away. Just take time, think about it differently, set the picture upside down on a ledge, or I put it on our fireplace mantle, take a look at it and ask yourself, like, what does it need? Sometimes if you get stuck on a painting, set it aside, go on Pinterest, go on unsplash.com, take a look at other people's artwork. How do they compose it? Just take a look at what's out there. And what'll happen for me many times is something will trigger in my mind. I'm like, oh, wait, I can see that I need to add more trees in the foreground. I want it darker. I didn't like this texture. Anyway, don't be afraid to play. So with here, I'm trying my rust ink. And remember, with rust ink, put your paint down, then put some of that rust ink in there, and then you have to use your spray bottle and spritz it. And then the ink will spread out. It'll create all those fun textures that we are trying out. And like I said, I didn't quite like it, and I decided I want my painting darker, so I changed it later on. But hey, just so you know what I did there and why I tried it. You may try it, and you may love it, and you should try it. And as I went towards me, I kept the colors warmer. And if it was way in the back, I kept it cooler. And that's usually the case in point, that when we have things that are closer to us, they have a warmer tone, and when they're in a far distance, they're a cooler tone. So I let that picture dry about a good hour. Don't use a hair dryer on rust ink. That is not a good idea. But I went ahead and I moved into the tree trunk in the back. Use a tiny bit of transparent red oxide. You could use yellow ochre as well, but the red oxide added some good textures, and when I only used a little bit of the paint with the water, I really liked it. It just had this really nice look to it, kind of ethereal, misty looking way in the back, and that's the only tree that's like that. Another painting that we do, I will have a number of those tree trunks in the back, creating this look, this different perspective of looking up, and I'll only have a few dark ones in the front. But this painting, we're going to go ahead and add a lot of dark tree trunks, and it's going to give us the illusion that we're standing right by some large trees looking back into the forest. So anyway, but as I move on with these tree trunks, I'm going to start to pull in some of my Lunar blue, and I'll mix some Van Dyke Daniel Smith brown with the Lunar blue, and I'll continue to paint these tree trunks in. And I want to keep it soft in the back and then super dark in the front. And I will tell you that later on, when I'm adding in the foreground trees, the ones that are closest to us, those things are almost black. Just never use pure black in a painting, because black, there's always a lot of interest you can create with blacks. And what I did was use some blue blacks, and then I used a little bit of purple black. I create that with Ultramarine or Indanthrene. I didn't use Indanthrene on this, but Indanthrene is darker. It's one of the darker blues that you can get, and that one mixed with some Lunar black would be beautiful. Sometimes I will mix my own blacks. One way you create a black is using a very dark brown, like your Van Dyke, and then pull out your Van Dyke, put a little bit of your Ultramarine blue deep in there, mix it together, and try it on a scrap piece of paper and check out how dark that is. If I want to bump that up more, I'll add a little bit of Hooker's green in there, and that'll start to give me like a blue-green type of black. You can have a lot of fun mixing colors and trying new things. So I'm going to continue on with my tree trunks, and as we move closer to us in our perspective, the trees are going to get darker and darker and darker. sometimes I have a hard time like seeing how to put a tree in, how to angle it. And even though I've painted, I pulled out my ruler and I went ahead and added the tree where I wanted it. I need the lines. I need to be able to see that so I can do something that looks halfway decent as a tree trunk. I don't have to have straight lines, but that's one way that you can help create the perspective, because you need a thin trunk on the top and you need to fatten it up towards the bottom. Now, by the time I was almost done with this painting, I had these two trees, the way you see them right now, the ones closest to us, well, they look like mirror images, and that's a no-no in painting. You do not want to have two objects look the way these do right now. So I'm just going to tell you that if you look at these two trees, I would have to cut that paper in half and let that be two separate paintings, because it looks like I've got a mirror image. You do not want an object repeated in the same form or the pattern. So when I was looking at my final details, one of the decisions that I made was to fatten up the tree on the left. It made a big difference with it. So that's another tip that I can tell you. And we're going to keep going on. I'm going to add in small branches, and then once I get those set, I'm going to grab my sponge again and I'm going to sponge in more layers of those trees using the same colors that I already have. And then as I move towards finishing this painting off, you're going to see that I darken up that foreground a lot. I'm going to use thick paint, and I am going to only use a little bit of water on my sponge, and that's because I need it thick, because I want to do it one time. I want rich, deep colors, and I want to slap that in there. So the other thing you're going to see me do is I develop these fir trees that are towards the bottom. The top trees are different, but the bottom trees are like a fir tree, and that has a zigzag effect. So I created some, and I felt that it looked like a letter U. It's like, it looked funny. So what I did to change the shape of it was I added a few more taller trees on the right-hand side. That's another thing you're going to see. So I just want to encourage you to play and have fun with it. I slowed this video down, and I won't be talking as much as we move on, because I want to give you a chance just to relax, listen to the music, and paint along. So, but I want you to see where I'm at, where I'm heading, what did I need to think about, and how did I change my picture. And don't worry, if you're like, Cindy, I have no clue, just tell me what to do. That's fine. I'll tell you some of the things that I do, and if you ever need help on your paintings, you let me know. Here's another tip for you. Get an old toothbrush and put it in your bin too. I used a toothbrush. I had a good amount of water on there mixed with the paint. It was not just fine paint. But if it was watery, I could add that into the background and it looked nice and soft. If I have a lot of paint on this and I splatter it, you're going to see a nice fine dots, and that's going to look like leaves that are popping out at you, that are closest to you. Those are great ways to add in more texture into a painting. Listen, it is always so much fun to be with you guys. I hope that you're doing well. Make sure to comment on the video. What did you like? What did you get out of it? Tell me what you're painting. And then make sure that you like the video, and that helps me reach other people just by getting your feedback. I love your comments, and don't be afraid to give me some constructive criticism. Tell me what you want us to paint too. So this is going to finish up. It was so good to be with you guys, and I can't wait to be with you next time. Take care.